So your next segment of reading is from page 23 to page 48. So we're going to go over a little bit of what happens in that segment. Remember, Thoreau, Henry, has just walked out on his teaching position. So in the next couple of pages, he and John, and this was John's idea, actually come up with the idea to have their own school. And so Henry's excited. This will be a school out in nature. It will be great. He can teach whatever he wants. And so then the scene changes to their school. And John's there kind of overseeing. Henry is teaching. The kids are there. He's talking about the 300 different types of grass, everything that you can learn from nature. It's a very transcendentalist idea. Let's learn from nature. There's so much knowledge all around us. We don't need textbooks. And so you see that whole school. Well, here we meet Ellen. Ellen's going to be a love interest of sorts for Henry and for John. And so Henry's kind of struck by her, and he allows her. She comes in on 25. She's bringing her younger brother to the school, but she wants to sit in too. Henry's like, yeah, sure, no charge, sit in. Well, she starts taking notes, and that's problematic. Henry gives her a really hard time for taking notes because he's like, why are you doing that? And she said, because you're supposed to take notes. And there's this whole dialogue on conformity because she's doing something just because she thinks she should do it rather than because she actually wants to do it or believes it will be helpful. So he uses that as kind of an object lesson. It's very frustrating for her, for Ellen. There's one quotation in here in this segment that I really love, and it's on page 27. She apologizes for interrupting him from teaching, and this is what he says. Of course you have. She says, please, Mr. Thoreau, go back to your students. I've interrupted. And he says, of course you have. Every creative event that ever happened in the world was an interruption, unexpected, unplanned for. The only people who ever got any place interesting are the people who got lost. And that just seems really interesting to me. I like it for some reason. Anyway, so the discussion about the notebook happens on the next page, all the way up through page 29. There we switch back to jail again, and Bailey's excited. He's running around. He's writing his name over and over and over again on the dirt floor. Bailey, Bailey, I can write my name. Look, I can do it all by myself. All of a sudden, after remembering his dealings with education, Henry's upset. And by the way, one other thing happens. He loses, well, no, we haven't gotten that far yet. Yeah. And he gets on to Bailey. He says, unlearn it. You don't need to learn anything. Don't write your name. Don't become a writer. There's this brief section on page 30 where he talks about his failed writing career. And is just kind of upset. So then it flashes again back to the school, and now we find out why he was upset, thinking about his teaching career. It's a new day, and he has this great lesson planned. He's going to take the kids out on a boat on the lake. And so he's like, John, if we don't have enough room for all the students in one boat, then you'll have to come in a second boat. And John's like, don't worry, we'll have enough room. Turns out they have one student left. That's it. Everybody else has been pulled. The parents heard the kind of craziness Henry was teaching, and they didn't want their kids to have any part of it. And while this scene is going on, Ellen comes because her brother was the one remaining student. Well, her dad told her that morning that her brother can't go back to school. So Henry now has no students. John says, I'm going to go back to the pencil factory. Henry decides to take Ellen for a boat ride. In this boat ride for the next, 3 or 4 pages, and this is starting about page 33, he's trying to teach Ellen what transcendentalism is. So if you want to really get a good idea of that, really pay attention to those pages, 34, 35, 36. In this conversation, Henry, he talks about lots of transcendentalist ideals, but he gets upset. He gets very impassioned, and he stands up and he literally rocks the boat. Okay, and Ellen's like, whoa, calm down. So another shout out to conformity and how that works there, but he literally rocks the boat, and Ellen begs him not to. Please, Mr. Thoreau, she says, please don't. Then the scene flashes again. He takes her back. The scene flashes. John is telling his mother Henry's in love. John sees that Henry likes Ellen. Well, then it flashes back, and Henry asks Ellen if she'll go to church with John. So Henry does like her, but he also thinks his brother likes her, so he decides to set John up with Ellen. So it turns out that they do go to church together. There's a brief pause where we go back to the center where Thoreau is actually in jail. So present time, Thoreau in jail. And he asks Bailey about marriage. And then they talk about how they're really free because they hear some people outside of the jail cell. Those are the people who conform. So he's like, Bailey, you and I, we don't conform. Even though we're in prison, we're the free ones. Everybody else is in jail. Then it switches. There's another scene over on the side. So remember, we're zigzagging back and forth. And it's Sunday, and Ellen's there with John. There's conversation because Henry's not in church. He's like pushing a wheelbarrow full of fertilizer to go take care of some plants. Anyway, then it flashes, and Henry has this little momentary prayer that Ellen will say yes because John's going to propose to her. And in the very comedic scene, starting on page 43, John is talking to Henry about what happened when he actually proposes to Ellen. And so Henry said, she said yes. Well, she said, and he's like laughing the whole time. It's a very funny scene. And Henry's like, she said yes. And John's like, she didn't say no. And Henry's like, well, what did she say? Turns out he says she quoted her father, who said that marriage to either of the Thoreau boys was unthinkable. So she laughs, I can't marry you. My dad said there was no way I could marry either of the Thoreau boys. But then she also asks, why doesn't Henry ask me? Can you imagine? A man proposes to you, and not only do you turn him down, you ask him why his brother hasn't proposed to you as well. And he says, well, if Henry asked you, would you say yes? And she said, no. She just wanted him to propose. Okay? So they have a good laugh about all of that. And kind of a conversation about them growing to be old, miserly bachelors together. And then the scene fades. So a very funny scene, very comedic scene. And then we switch on page 46 to a very sad scene. All of a sudden the light goes dark. The light goes black. In utter darkness, the church bell tolls mournfully. And you see a coffin. What's happened now is that John has died not long after. And so you see those differences. And he says, so there's this whole funeral scene. Well, it turns out that Ellen comes back for the funeral. They're talking. She wants to know what happened. He says, you know, even if a lightning bolt, this is on page 48, would have struck my brother, that would have been worthy of the size of the man. My brother was such a great man that to have a death that would suit him, he would have had to have been struck by a lightning bolt. But instead, he had a ridiculous death. He was shaving, and his razor was a little rusted. And in the middle of shaving, he thought of something funny, and he laughed. And that caused him to nick himself, not on the neck or anything, but on his thumb. And he got blood poisoning, and in 3 days died. So he was like, that's a ridiculous kind of death for my brother. But at that moment, Ellen says she finally understands that idea of transcendentalism that Henry was trying to teach her earlier. And at the bottom of 48, important line, she says, in the boat, I didn't understand, really. But is it possible, Henry, that even though he stopped living, John continues to be? Okay, because there was this whole conversation of living versus being. And Henry's like, yeah, she's got it. And there's this awkward moment where he wants to hug her but doesn't. And that ends your reading for this section, page 48. Sad note, lots of comedic things in there. But remember, this is a summary of his life. Okay, he's sitting in jail thinking about all of these different important moments in his life, and that's going to bring him to a conclusion to change who he is and how he's been. So that's why there's such a variety of this. So try not to get confused whenever you switch to a different scene. Just kind of allow yourself. Don't try to figure it out. It'll get explained as you continue to read. So keep reading. Let me know if you have any questions.